Recording.
Hi, I'm Ed Taylor at the University of California, Davis, and today I'd like to introduce you to LEWI. LEWI stands for Local Economy-Wide Impact Evaluation. We created LEWI for a number of different reasons, but four of the main reasons are these. First of all, when you think about the impacts of programs, government programs, poverty programs, technology programs, these impacts are a lot more complex than most people think. A big reason for that is that the programs usually don't only affect the targeted household, the targeted farmer or whomever, they also create spillover effects to other households within local economies, households that were not targeted. Secondly, impacts are often bigger than we think. Many impact studies miss out on most of the impacts of interventions. Third, timing matters. Usually we can't wait 2 or 3 years for the results of a study, and it takes 2 or 3 years typically to carry out a baseline survey, then to roll out the program, wait enough time for the program to have impacts, and then finally carry out a follow-on survey afterwards. And fourth, randomized controlled experiments are a very useful tool to study impacts of government programs, but usually randomized control experiments are not feasible in real-world settings. Again, especially when timing matters, but for other reasons. It might be impossible to devise a treatment and a control group. It might not be considered ethical to carry out a program, to deny the benefits of the program to some groups and while giving them to other groups, and so forth. So all of these concerns often arise when we design experimental approaches to measure impacts. So while experiments are extremely important, they aren't always possible. To illustrate what we mean by local economy impacts, let's think about a social cash transfer program. Social cash transfer programs give cash to poor people. Poor people get that cash, and our impact evaluations using randomized control trials find that often this cash has very positive impacts in the beneficiary households. Families eat better, kids are more likely to go to school. There's some evidence that families buy more seeds and fertilizer, grow more crops, market more crops, and so forth. But that isn't the end of the story. The impacts go beyond the households that get the cash. Why? Because they spend the cash. This household goes to market. It buys some food. Where does it buy the food? Who sells it the food? Vendors in the market. Those vendors now see their incomes increase. Where do the vendors get their food? They go and buy that food from farmers. Now the income of farmers increases as a result of your cash transfer program. Farmers may not get the cash from the program, but they benefit from the program because of all of these arrows that we're seeing emerge in this figure, the linkages, the spillover effects of the program. Their incomes increase, they spend their income maybe on food, maybe on non-food items. That creates new incomes for other vendors and other producers. And at the end of the day, you have a picture here with a lot of arrows in it, showing a lot of different spillover effects of what began with a cash transfer to a single household or group of households. There might be feedback effects that benefit the household that gets the cash. So at the end of the day, that household might receive not only the benefit of the cash, but also maybe selling more goods to other households in the village whose income has increased directly or indirectly because of the social cash transfer project. When we design randomized control trials, we need a control or comparison village. We try to find those villages far away from the villages that are actually getting the cash, because there can be spillovers to those control villages too. And if control villages' incomes change as a result of your program, they aren't a good comparison group anymore. Above all, what LEWI does is it changes the way people think about how their programs create impacts. And this might be the biggest impact of LEWI of all. Here's an example. President John Mahama opened up the Pan-African Conference on Inequalities with this statement. He said, LEAP, which is the poverty program that gives cash to poor people in Ghana, LEAP has had a positive impact on local economic growth, beneficiaries spend about 80% of their income on the local economy, so that every SETI transferred to a beneficiary has the potential of increasing the local economy by 2.5 SETIs. That number, 2.5 SETIs, came out of the Louis evaluation of the LEAP program in Ghana. How do you make a Louis model? Well, there are a couple of steps here. First of all, we carry out surveys, we collect the data, and we use those data to build a model of the beneficiary, or we could call treated households, the households that are directly targeted by your program, whether it's a cash transfer program. In that case, these would be the households that are eligible for cash transfers. Could also be a productive intervention to make farmers more productive. The beneficiary household then would be the farmer households that receive the extension services or whatever it is. So we use data from the survey to build a model of the beneficiary households. There's a rich tradition in development economics of building models of individual households. We call these agricultural household models. So there's a tradition to stand on there that we borrow from. Nothing new there. We also use data from the surveys to build a model of the non-beneficiary households in the same villages or regions that that receive the benefits of the program. So these non-beneficiary households, in the case of a cash transfer program, would be the ones that don't qualify for cash transfers. They may be poor, but not poor enough to actually be eligible for the social cash transfers. Or perhaps they don't have orphans or vulnerable children living within their households, and that might be a criterion for receiving cash. Of course, some of the non-beneficiary households might be relatively well off, and on average they are. They have more assets, typically more labor, they're more likely to have land and so forth than the eligible households. Now, as the cash increases demand in the local economy, these ineligible households are often in the best position to increase their supply to meet the demand. So many of the spillover effects of this program are likely to go to the non-beneficiary households. Once we have constructed models of these two household groups, we then tie them together into a model of the whole local economy. And to do this, we draw from another rich tradition in development economics, that of general equilibrium modeling. General equilibrium models of whole economies have been built for a long time. They're aggregate models for the most part. What we're doing here is very micro or disaggregated, so we're using them in a new way, but we use them to combine our models of individual household groups into a model of the local economy, the village cluster, however we want to define that local region. Once we have our model set and developed, we can then use it to simulate the impacts of our intervention on the local economy. Impacts on each of these two household groups, beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, but also total or aggregate impacts on the whole local economy. So this is the goal at the end of our study, is to actually use our model as a way of simulating impacts of programs on local economies. Once we have our Louis model up and running, we can then fold it into a cost-benefit analysis of the program. Now, here's the equation that is used for a traditional cost-benefit analysis. What we do is we calculate the net present value of the project by taking the sum of the difference in income between having the project, which is YP, and not having the project, which is YNP. We subtract off the cost of the project, which here is I. We divide through by a discount factor, and we sum it up over time for however many years we wish to do. Now, when we calculate NPV from a Louis model, we capture benefits that you don't capture in a conventional cost-benefit analysis. We're also capturing the spillover effects on the ineligible households, the households that are not targeted by your development program. A conventional cost-benefit analysis would be limited to the impacts on the households that are targeted by the program. And so because of this, net present values of programs typically come out being larger when you use a Louis approach than when you use a conventional cost-benefit analysis. Let me give you 3 examples of Louis studies that have been carried out in the last few years. The first one is of social cash transfer programs. We've carried out studies in 7 different African countries. These bars give you the multiplier effects of a dollar of cash transferred to a poor household in each one of these countries. The blue bar is the effect if we ignore any impacts on prices. The red bars are real effects, that is, they're adjusted for inflation. And the blue line that cuts across the middle of this figure is the dollar itself that you've transferred to the poor household. Now you can see that all of these bars are much taller than that horizontal blue line. That tells us that the impacts of these cash transfer programs are bigger than the amount of cash that is transferred to poor households. And there in that red square there, the third set of bars above Ghana, you can see the 2.5, which the president of Ghana referred to in his address to African nations. A second example of a Louis study is very recent. This comes out of Rwanda, and this is a study of the impacts of Congolese refugees who arrived to UNHCR camps in Rwanda. To do this model, we built a model of the refugee camp. We then built a model of the host country economy around the camp out to a radius of 10 kilometers. We integrated those two together into a local economy model, and then we used it to simulate what happens when a new refugee comes to the camp. And what we found is that the total impact of that refugee on income in the local economy is bigger than the cost of providing food to the refugee. In fact, the multiplier effect due to an additional refugee is on the order of between 1.21 and 1.99, nearly $2 of income growth in the host country economy and the refugee camp combined, this whole local economy. Income increases by nearly $2 in one case for each dollar of cost of supporting the new refugee. In other words, refugees who go into refugee camps in Rwanda create positive spillover effects that raise income in host country households around the camps. Now, the third study example that I want to share with you hasn't been done yet, but it is in the planning phase. And this is to use a Louis model to understand the impacts of homegrown school feeding programs. In this program, schools get cash. The schools use this cash to buy food from local farmers to feed the kids. When the schools buy food from local farmers, this stimulates production on those farms. It raises income for the farmers. The farmers spend their income, and when they spend their income, this creates new income increases and new stimulus to production within local economies. Now, schools also buy from traders. Traders may source their food from within the local economy, in which case they transmit benefits to others near the schools, or they may bring food in from other parts of the country, in which case they transmit impacts of your school feeding program to other parts of the country, creating income gains there. Homegrown school feeding programs then could create local income multipliers and spillovers to the rest of the country that are benefits that exceed the cost of the program. We don't know this yet because we haven't carried out these studies, but projects are currently being planned for Kenya by the World Food Program and also for Zambia by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations together with the World Food Program. Here's the same picture that we saw before, only we've replaced that picture in the top left corner of the household that received the social cash transfer with a picture of a school. This is the school that receives cash under the homegrown school feeding program, and you can see here in this picture that we can tell the same story, that the school now is spending its cash to buy food from traders and farmers within the local economy. You might wonder how the results of Louis modeling compare to the results of experiments. how can we test whether the predictions that come out of a local economy-wide model actually happen in the real world? Well, in Lesotho, we were able to put Louis to the test. The reason we were able to do it is that households that were not eligible for the social cash transfer under the Child Grants Program in Lesotho, those households were interviewed in the baseline survey, which was carried out before the cash was distributed, and they were resurveyed a couple of years later in the follow-on survey. So we could compare the incomes of both the eligible beneficiary households before and after, and the results of income in the ineligible households before and after the cash transfers were given out. And here's what we found. The Louis model predicted that each Mulati transferred by Lesotho's Child Grants Program to poor households created an increase in income in the local economy within the village cluster of between 1.5 and 2.2 Mulati of income. 2 years later, when we did the experimental analysis and actually looked at what happened to incomes in the beneficiary and non-beneficiary households, we found an income multiplier that was actually higher. It was 1.86 to 2.20, depending upon the impact that the program has on local prices. So, in other words, the Louis estimate of program impacts, it was large, but it was also conservative. If we combine Louis with experiments like we were able to do in Lesotho, then we could end up with a whole new way, a whole new gold standard, you could say, to evaluate the impacts of programs. Thank you very much.